It's Monday, November 11th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. Week 10 Sunday slate in the books. As you all know, here on the Sunday Recap Show, I always start us off with a solo recap of the Sunday Night Football game before Andy Behrens jumps on and we dive into everything else that happened on Sunday. So let's get into it. We've got an interesting game to talk through here. Lions 26, Texans 23. Felt like a Thursday night game at times. This one, that's for sure. Tweeting back and forth with ESPN's Bill Barnwell. I think we paid for a fantastic Thursday night game with this Sunday night game. Although I will say, I think it ended up actually really delivering in the end. Let's start on the Lions side here. That is and we'll do this care, don't care style as we always do. I think the thing I care about here with the Lions is Detroit reminding us that contending is not always pretty. You know, I know what people are going to say here. Well, contender. What are you talking about? Did you watch this game? Yeah, I watched this game, and what I saw in this one was a championship team. Again, I know what people are saying. Harmon, Jared Goff, threw 5 picks. The Lions looked like a disaster for most of this game against a Texans team that's not perfect. I hear you. Is the specter of this Jared Goff game sort of always hanging around? Yeah, I do feel that way with Goff. You know, we know who Goff is at this point. I think he's a great quarterback, but he certainly can, when he's pressured, go into a hole. And we don't see it very often. We saw it tonight in epic fashion. This tweet from Chance Descalos, who's he's an NFL analyst with Next Gen Stats. He noted that there had been 2 instances in the Next Gen Stats era of a quarterback throwing an interception to every level of the field: behind the line of scrimmage, short, intermediate, and deep in a single game. One of those games was Nathan Peterman, Week 11, 2017. The other was Jared Goff tonight. Hopefully you guys remember the Nathan Peterman game. Week 11, 2017, the meltdown that was the Nathan Peterman game. That was the company that Jared Goff was keeping tonight. So again, I know what you're saying out there. How could you possibly come out of this game feeling great about the Detroit Lions? Well, because they won the damn game. And, you know, Dan Campbell said in his post-halftime interview that this is going to come one step at a time. We can't get it all back at once. He said it, so it was. I think we saw a full team effort from the Detroit Lions take place to get in a position to kick that game-winning field goal. Shout out to Jake Bates, by the way, on that, and just being kind of a revelation for the Lions this year. We saw the defense pick off C.J. Stroud twice, consistently put him under duress with the pass rush. We saw Jameson Williams make critical downfield catches, set up touchdowns. We saw the running backs heat up in the second half after being ice cold in the first. Montgomery punched in a touchdown. He had a 24-yard catch and run. Jahmyr Gibbs ripping off several big yardage plays as a receiver and as a rusher. And most notably of all, I always talk about how it's difficult for teams to double the slot receiver and truly take that guy away. You really did feel, and I think see, real evidence that the Texans were doing that with Amon-Ra St. Brown. They're saying, we're not letting this guy beat us, especially on critical down and distance situations. Well, that's great. Sometimes the offensive players earn their paycheck, and we watched St. Brown and Goff hook up multiple times on those critical down and distance situations in the second half. The Lions are a complete team. They're not always a pretty team. I'd actually argue that them being this weird, gritty, kind of we win ugly sometimes team is actually more in line with who Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes want this team to be, more so than the team that I think fantasy managers have wanted throughout the course of this year, because there has been some, despite the fact that the Lions are one of the best teams in the league, there's been some like frustration from fantasy players about the Lions, because I think people want the Lions to be what they were in 2022 and the bulk of 2023, which was this shootout team, you know, a defense that's giving it up on the other end, an offense that is going to absolutely just fireworks show all game long. Despite injuries on defense, that side of the ball has been more than competent. They've been one of the best defenses in the league. They're second in EPA per play allowed since week 5. That is the type of team that we're dealing with here. This complete team, this win ugly team that they are, it's not going to bring back that same fantasy bonanza team that we're used to with the Lions of old. So I think it's past time that we adjust to those expectations with Detroit from a fantasy sense. From a real life NFL sense, yes, this was an ugly game, a bizarre game from Jared Goff, but one that I think highlighted what this Lions team is, which is a full strength operation, one that really, all of the classic cliche stuff has the sort of confidence and bravado and led by a guy in Dan Campbell who exudes all of that is a championship type football team. So the Lions are on a Super Bowl pick this year, so maybe bias is admitted here, but 5 picks from Goff didn't, send me freaking out with that one. Let's go to the thing I don't care about, which kind of really want to care about Joe Mixon's 0.8 yards per carry on the other side here with the Houston Texans, because it's such an outlier performance from what we've got from Joe Mixon so far this year. Mixon, prior to this week, had gone over 100 rushing yards in every single game that he started and finished for the Houston Texans, 5 games here heading into week 10. And I kind of want to use this Mixon point to take a jumping off discussion about the Texans as a whole. The Texans, I'm selling on them reaching the preseason hype, for a variety of different reasons. One, the receiver trio will now and will never, that's never going to be together. That's over. They're never going to be all fully healthy at the same time now that Diggs is on IR. Collins probably back next week, but still, no more Diggs. Tank Dell, we'll see. It's not going to happen. Second is that the offensive line is a beyond broken unit, especially in the second half. We saw those issues crop up. And I also think we're at a stage, I think people are going to do we need to have a difficult conversation about CJ Stroud stuff. And look, maybe that's warranted, but I'll at least say that we're at a stage where Stroud is starting to let bad habits creep into what I think was an ultra clean game as a rookie. That's just where we're at. I don't think that means that's who he is forever, because personally, I believe he's still one of the most promising young quarterbacks in the NFL. And I think that the Texans can get back to superstar play with CJ Stroud if we can do 3 things. One, if we can improve up front. Second, get Nico Collins back in place as the best player on this offense. And 3, stay on schedule with the run game. The first is probably an offseason task. The second, maybe Collins comes back next week. I would say he probably comes back next week. The third is something that I think we should not have to worry about, despite the slow night from Joe Mixon in week 10. Again, Mixon has been awesome this year for the Texans. Even when they get away from those zone concept runs, he has 6.2 yards per carry on gap runs, according to Fantasy Points data. And again, he's been a steady presence sort of on the zone runs. Slowing down Mixon in this game, I think, was a credit to Detroit, not something that Mixon flubbed up or any of these sort of issues here for Houston crept into the thing. Like I said, since week 6, the Lions are a top 10 rushing success rate team and one of the best defenses overall in the NFL. That is the type of unit that can just blot out a really good run game, and that's what we saw here in this one. So provided Mixon can get back on track, I think most of the evidence points to that he can get back on track. I think a lot of the issues that haunted Stroud in the second half are like mostly what we've seen this year, the lack of Nico Collins issues in this passing game. Nico Collins is an elite receiver in the league. You don't just take that guy away and just everything is fine. In the second half, according to Next Gen Stats, Stroud completed just 1 pass under pressure for 17 yards, sacked twice. One of those was a strip sack. He also tore up the Lions in the slot, 8 of 9 for 177 yards, got nothing on targets out wide. I will remind everyone, Nico Collins was both CJ Stroud's most targeted receiver when under pressure this year when he was out there, and was the most effective out wide receiver in the league prior to getting hurt. So, look, when the offense doesn't have your best players rolling, when Mixon's off tonight, when Collins still isn't available, the offense is going to flounder, and even the quarterback is going to flounder. I'm not saying that CJ Stroud is blameless. I'm not saying, that he has not had those bad habits creep into his game. And maybe if those bad habits don't get ironed out in a month or 2 or whatever, by the end of the season, maybe then we can have this discussion that people are probably, I haven't looked at Twitter since the game ended. I guarantee you there's somebody out there saying that. There are going to be people that want to do the like anti CJ Stroud stuff. And I get it. Your play is your play and you got to stand on your play. And I don't think Stroud has played well over the last, couple weeks, a month, whatever. But overall still have a lot of faith that this Texans team, once they get their top receiver back and the run game is on, and maybe even, again, Tank Dell, who was pretty good tonight, Stroud lets that pass go. We're probably talking about a much bigger game. The one I'm talking about, the second interception. We're probably talking about a bigger game than 5 for 39 with Tank Dell on 9 targets. He probably scores on that play where he was completely wide open thanks to a busted coverage there for Detroit. Overall, still have faith in this unit, even if I am selling on them reaching the high heights of their preseason hype train. So really interesting game. Bit of a bizarre game, but one that I think we could take some big picture takeaways away from two teams that I think will be in the postseason. The Texans might be one of these disappointing postseason teams. They win the AFC South, whatever. Maybe they get dropped off by one of the better teams in the AFC, although, AFC teams, all of them are kind of flawed at this point. Detroit, I think, can still win the Super Bowl this year. I think these are two teams that are really good, and they gave each other a fight, which made this one a pretty exciting one to watch, even if I thought these guys might push for like 10 combined freaking interceptions in this game at one point. All right, with that, we can toss to the rest of the show with Andy Behrens. We break down the games you care the most about, the games you sort of care about, and the games that could have been an email. Let's get to the show. Joining us now, as he does every Sunday for the recap show, is my good buddy, Andy Behrens. What's going on, pal?
Quite a Sunday. We had some really fun games. We had some legit fun games. Not so much in the later window, but in the early window it was good. I can't wait to discuss with you which of the Bears' 3 offensive points today was my favorite. So I'm fired up.
Yeah. For the new folks here, we do split these games into 3 categories, which is the games you care about, the games we sort of care about, and the games that could have been an email. I'll give you all a quick 3 seconds to guess which category the Bears are in.
Yeah,
all right, that was your 3 seconds. That was your 3 seconds, and hopefully all your guesses are filed. And if you guessed email, you've guessed correctly. But yeah, Andy, listen, it was a great Sunday. I will say, I had the feeling at the end of the 1 p.m. window when Scott Hansen is saying, "Oh man, look at all these games we've got in within 1 score." Because there's some sort of karmic balance, I think, to being a football fan or being a fantasy player for sure. There's some sort of karmic balance in it all. I knew that we were going to be paying for it in some way, and these are two. And look, I'm speaking out of turn here because we haven't seen the Sunday night game and obviously not the Monday night game as we're recording this. Those look like they could be pretty good contests. I had a feeling we're paying for it somewhere after the Thursday night game, which was one of the best games of the year, and we paid for it in that 4 p.m. slate, baby. What a slog that was.
Yeah, we'll get into it later, but I thought at least, I thought the Jets and Cardinals would give us a balanced quality game, but no, it ended up being a little bit of a statement game for Arizona as they head into their bye, and we got nothing but lopsided affairs in the late window. We'll talk about it later, but how wild is it that we're already at the point of the season where we're just begging Aaron Rodgers to produce a little bit of garbage time something, which he didn't. He was miserable per as usual.
Yeah, not a great place to be. But let's talk about some good games here. Let's get into the games that we definitely care about, the games we really care about, starting with what looked like it was going to be the game of the week going in. I think it was definitely the best game of the week here. Steelers 28, Commanders 27. If you like freak show sideline tight coverage catches, this game was for you. A lot of that in this one. But let's start on the Steelers side of things here, Andy Behrens. What are your takeaways from this team in what's yet another successful outing for one Russell Wilson?
Yeah, first of all, really, really fun game. Comeback win for Pittsburgh. This is 3 wins in as many starts for Russ, right? 3 touchdown passes. He's about to enter, we'll keep it focused on this game pretty soon, but he's about to enter an incredibly friendly stretch of the schedule, right? They get all these division games coming up, and it turns out that every division opponent is a really friendly pass defense, right? They get Baltimore coming up, and they're giving up over 290 passing yards per week. So sensational stretch of games coming up for Russ, and he was really good in this one. Not necessarily in terms of completion percentage, but man, like the most important throws he made were just dead on the money. Beautiful balls. That last touchdown pass to Mike Williams was gorgeous. George Pickens was mostly great in this one. The touchdown catch was phenomenal. There's always something weird with George Pickens, right? What was he doing on the deep ball interception? I've no idea. Look like maybe there could have been a little more effort made in pursuit of it, and then he gets up and he doesn't even mess with the guy who's actually intercepted it. He just immediately gets in a fight with the other guy who was in coverage on the play. So he's kind of a party. That running game wise, Warren and Najee combined for 35 carries. Tough running by both of them. We had a little bit of an injury scare from Najee Harris, but he returned to the game. So really a fun one. I don't know. This is well beyond anything that I expected from Russell Wilson. And I think he's a legitimate fantasy ad right now, and somebody that you can, in a smaller league, you're streaming him for the next 4 or 5. I mean, it's like a month and a half of relatively friendly opponents coming up on the schedule. So he's going to be a streamer or a deeper league starter for a little while.
Yeah, I added him and started him over CJ Stroud in this game. And look, maybe you've already listened to me recap the Sunday night game, which obviously we record before we record this part of the show. So again, maybe I'm making myself sound like an idiot by saying that because CJ Stroud has somehow thrown 6 touchdowns against the Lions or whatever. But I added him and started him this week because it just didn't feel good about Nico playing in that game. So, and he's somebody that, hey, depending on the matchup, I might be starting him over a guy like CJ Stroud in fantasy because you mentioned the completion percentage and just the way this passing offense feels right now. I got to imagine, I joked like I don't want a next gen stats passing chart on Russell Wilson. I want a next gen stats route chart on Russell Wilson because I want to see what routes he's throwing here, because just maybe I'm exaggerating it, but it sure feels like every route is either a go route, a fade route, a little flat route, or like a slant, and that's about it. And that's the entire passing game. But you know what, Andy? It works. All right? Yeah. Like it really works with both Russell Wilson and the personnel of this offense, because obviously the run game is really fruitful. It's not, crazy production, and Najee Harris 2.5 yards per carry. No one rips off like big, long, explosive runs. For the most part, over the last month and a half, this has been a really good run game, and the wide receivers, this is the type of players that they have. So I really feel like there's a lot of staying power with Russell Wilson, and I'm definitely among the people that needs to, apologize or own up to being pretty pessimistic about the whole Russell Wilson thing. And like I said, I believe there's a lot of staying power in this.
Yeah, well, that's going to be most of us. That's going to be basically everybody except Mike Tomlin, right? Like he's the one person who kind of dug in on, and he's the most important person to dig in on Russell Wilson, and they clearly got it right. Like his best throws each week are some of the best throws that we see from the entire slate of games, and that was definitely true on Sunday as well.
Yeah, I love that you point at that schedule. George Pickens is a guy who might be I love that you called him a party. I always say that there is never you can't have a normal conversation about George Pickens. Probably you can't really even have a normal game from George Pickens at this point. But that schedule coming up, especially some of these defenses that Baltimore vulnerable to the deep pass. Producer Colin and I were talking about this week. I think how does anybody beat Baltimore right now? They just look so good. I'm like, well, let me tell you what. Actually, I think we were talking about the Steelers at one, and I was like, no, the Steelers are probably a top 10 team in the NFL right now. And by the way, they're definitely beating Baltimore. One of these two games, it's a lock. They're beating Baltimore at some point, and a lot of it I think will come because George Pickens and Russell Wilson are going to drop heaters on that secondary all game long.
Yeah, I had written about this in the newsletter last week, just running through some guys that I thought were, if not buy lows, they were at least just buy candidates, right? And I really think Pickens is such a screaming buy, and this was a pretty noisy game for him. Really good stat line, and I think people are going to start looking ahead at this schedule. And they got they got the Ravens twice more. They got Cleveland twice more. They got Cincinnati coming up. I don't know. It's not, if not a layup line, it's about as close as you can get. So I think he's got a bunch of just huge weeks ahead of him, and we've got the Yahoo Public League trade deadline deadline like a few days away. So that is definitely somebody I'm being proactive with.
Let's talk Commanders here. I mentioned, if you like sideline deep catches, this game is for you, not just because of George Pickens and Mike Williams, who caught his lone target was obviously the 32-yard go-ahead touchdown in the fourth quarter. It was also Terry McLaurin, who I rattled off a lot of talking points this week about Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin, pushing it down the field and like how timely they are with those and the exact coverage looks that they go deep against, which is mostly what Pittsburgh played. That did play out in this game, but really it didn't necessarily result in any passing touchdowns, obviously, for Jaden Daniels. Not a big fantasy game for Jaden Daniels overall, but still you continue to see sort of that connection with him and Terry McLaurin. But otherwise, passing game is a little bit fits and starts in this one for Washington.
Yeah, this is probably the best defense that Jaden Daniels has faced, right? So not surprising necessarily. That was really his first, like, not particularly impactful fantasy performance. 202 scoreless yards in this one. Completes only about 50% of his throws, which is not what we've come to expect from Daniels. Only 5 rushing yards. Like they contained him well, and they clearly, this is as smart as anybody has played against Washington, and it's the first time that he's faced a defense that if he got in a little bit of trouble, things were covered downfield immediately. He couldn't just go get 10 yards. This was definitely a challenge. He was harassed. He was contained. McLaurin's so good though. It's really nice. It's really nice to see him at least tied to a quarterback where even if things aren't perfect for the offense, McLaurin is still going to get his because the quarterback can still put it on him, and we can give him high yield opportunities. It didn't happen in a win, but happy for Austin Eckler, who made a couple of trips to the end zone, 2 rushing touchdowns for him. Decent day on the ground, decent day overall.
Yeah, 59% of the team carries for Austin Eckler. 69% rushing success rate, which is really good. Again, a lot of that is because he was a late down and touchdown option for this team. So yeah, he's never going to become 100%. Like I just inherit all of the carries when Brian Robinson sits, but he does. I think we've seen enough evidence now to say that when Brian Robinson's out there, Austin Eckler is probably a guy that needs to be in your starting fantasy lineup, especially because we do believe in this offense. And like you mentioned, I don't think we're going to get another game where Washington is tested this much. They got a big game against Thursday night against the Eagles. That could go a long way in deciding who's going to win this division. Let's move to the next game here. 49ers 23, Buccaneers 20. Andy, let's talk about 49ers here, where obviously the big story is a lot of returning players for the San Francisco 49ers. Let's start with the biggest name, of course. Christian McCaffrey gets back in here, and I know you had a lot of thoughts about this 49ers backfield and what we may or may not see. What do you think about what actually happened in this game?
Yeah, well, what actually happened is they treated Christian McCaffrey as if this was week 1 and he'd never been injured, right? Like he just got the full Christian McCaffrey workload. He handles 19 touches in this one. He's active as a receiver, active as a rusher. Jordan Mason got like an early courtesy carry. That was really it. And Jordan Mason has been so good. Like I don't know, whatever. I'm not Kyle Shanahan. He's freaking NFL head coach. Who am I? I'm a little bit surprised that they aren't continuing to give Jordan Mason a handful of carries, if only because like the production was there and we can save a little bit of wear with Christian McCaffrey. But whatever. If they, if this is the way it's going to be, that's great for McCaffrey managers. Hopefully he's able to hold up, but this was, he just got the full Christian, like this could have been a game log from last year or the previous season. Like this was full, ready to go, no health questions, Christian McCaffrey. And I'm assuming he's come out of the game just fine. So that's a great sign moving forward if you have him. And now you have to think about Jordan Mason more as just, this is a backup who you probably still need to roster, right? Because Christian McCaffrey has missed, 8 games this year due to injury, and he just returned. And if anything happens to him, we know that we basically have a top 5, top 6 fantasy back in Jordan Mason, but you can't, I guess the hopeful scenario was that he would be somebody that we could actually put in a flex spot and use. Can't do that. Like, I don't know if there's any possibility of like a 1 carry game behind McCaffrey. You can't use him, but you also probably shouldn't drop him unless it's like an 8-team league or something like that. So that's a big bother. I gotta say this, San Francisco wins this game, but it felt like a bad vibes win for the Niners, right? Like there were rough scenes all around. Jake Moody returned and he missed 3 field goals, and there was an on-field altercation involving Deebo Samuel and the long slapper and Moody, where Deebo like basically hit them both in the head. Long whatever.
Slapper was a bit of a Freudian slip there, Andy, but I mean,
sorry. Like I didn't talk. That's fine, but maybe we shouldn't be striking teammates mid game. That was something. Apparently, there was a long locker room session immediately following the game for the Niners. Didn't open the locker room door for a little while. So I don't know. Be interesting to hear what comes out this week about that team and its current mood. I mean, they got to win. And like Juwan Jennings, great game, 11 targets. Ricky Pearsall, sensational game. A 46-yard touchdown was a highlight play that came early. Saw another target in the end zone. They were leaning on him in the late go ahead drive. So really impressive games from both of those two.
You're right that this doesn't feel like all right, all is well with the 49ers sort of win. I mean, they barely beat a extremely banged up Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that we'll talk about in just a second now at this point. But I do want to talk about those wide receivers because I think we learned a lot about the wide receivers in this game. And, it's worth remembering that obviously the big storyline here is Christian McCaffrey's return off of the long absence. That's going to lead like basically every fantasy podcast. But I would argue that getting Juwan Jennings back in this wide receiver room is maybe not as equally impactful. But again, we learned a lot from it because we haven't seen Jennings since the game that Ayuk tore his ACL. He missed that game and then he missed the game after, and then they went on the bye. So Jennings coming back here I thought was interesting because obviously super productive fantasy game, leads the team in targets, leads the team in route participation. But it was the way that he did it I thought was really interesting, Andy, because if you look at like Jennings's role throughout the course of his career, he's always been kind of like a power slot receiver for this team. But Kyle Shanahan comes in after the game and points out in our fantasy handle, Yahoo Fantasy actually tweeted the quote graphic that from Kyle Shanahan, it's his first time playing X and he'll be doing that the rest of the year. You look at obviously I haven't watched the film on this game yet, but you look at where he lined up. He led the wide receivers in percentage of snaps outside. And so he was the X receiver, which is Ayuk's vacated position. So a little bit of a role change for Jennings, but watching this game and kind of having it on the ISO TV here, I thought he played really well in this game. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because Jennings has mostly been a third down specialist, a late down guy. If you're playing on late downs, you're going to see more man coverage as that guy. And he's last season, 10 of his 19 catches came on third down, according to True Media, and he was targeted on 21.1% of his routes against man coverage compared to 13.6 against zone coverage. Again, that makes sense. Like as that X receiver, you're going to need to beat man coverage. You're going to need to win on ISO routes. He's not going to do it in the same way that Brandon Ayuk does, but he does it well enough on these kind of like quick outbreaking routes. I posted the next gen route chart. You see just a bunch of outbreaking patterns. So I think there's a lot of staying power for Jennings, and probably, he's not, Debo's kind of his own thing, but in terms of like the Jennings Pearsall debate, I feel pretty good about Jennings a little bit ahead of Pearsall rest of the season. Although really liked what I saw out of Pearsall as kind of that slot receiver, slot flanker hybrid and both these guys might be fantasy starters going forward, but certainly want to see it also against a team that's not the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, I kind of feel like they're both fantasy starters moving forward, right? Because Pearsall has an explosive element to his game. He's playing a lot. Like it's not at the same level of Jennings. I was a little bit surprised by Jennings' usage, if only because Pearsall was theoretically drafted basically to be a potential Brandon Ayuk replacement, and now they find themselves in a situation where they need to replace Brandon Ayuk, and they kind of plug Jennings in it. But whatever, it's fine. Like there's playing time for all these guys alongside Kittle and Samuel, in part because Samuel is such a like weirdly high volume gadgety player. So you could these guys can both see the field. Pearsall is just so explosive.
Yeah.
Highlight machine in college. If people don't know, just an absolutely absurd athlete, 6'3", 4.4 speed, 42-inch vertical. And you see the athleticism on the field. It reminds me of some of the best plays from Christian Watson. This is a bad guy. I don't mean that he's exactly like Christian Watson, but some of those plays in Christian Watson's first year where dudes just took bad angles. Like they just weren't ready for him to be maybe quite as electric as he is. I just thought the touchdown was a really impressive play. And he was just impressive throughout this one. And if he's gonna play 35 to 45 snaps a game, and he's in line for 5 opportunities, 6 targets, something like that, I'm down. I'm willing to start him in 10, 12 team leagues.
Yeah, I feel you. Look, there were a few draft analysts that were higher on Ricky Pearsall than me. He was my wide receiver 5 or 6 in this class. I liked him as a late first round prospect, even though people kind of balked at that selection. Ran a route on over 70% of the dropbacks. Like you said, he saw real deal volume. Actually had the highest air yards per target among these wideouts too. So I thought Jennings playing in that X receiver role was something I didn't expect.
Yeah.
And I actually think that Pearsall not playing that role, because obviously you say he's drafted to be Ayuk's replacement. He certainly was not drafted to play the same position as Ayuk within the wide receiver room, but might have had to step up and take his volume. Like, I think this is him not playing that role, I think is best for him long term, where Jennings, I think, surprised me by playing there. But if you just look back at his history, it actually kind of makes a little bit of sense. Let's talk Buccaneers here. I feel bad for this team, honestly, at this point. They lose Tristan Wirfs to a serious injury in this game. He's one of those tackles that changes the complexion of the offense, I think, if you don't have that guy. And they're at this point, just every single week, it's how many targets can we get to Rachaad White and Cade Otton? And that's just kind of what the offense is now at this point.
Yeah. And Baker Mayfield was a very fun watch in this game and still finished with only 116 passing yards, right? No receiver had over 40 yards. People are gonna see and remember the play where Baker is somehow stiff arming Bosa and holding him off for like 4, 5, 6 yards, and then completes a wild throw, I think, to Rachaad White. So that was really fun. Baker's been really fun, but he's just, the whole offense now is really on fumes. I believe they're going into a bye, which is much needed. And hopefully they can get Mike Evans back beyond that, because they're just, the worst loss is huge. But they need playmakers beyond, Cade Otton's had a really nice run. This is always going to be a difficult matchup for Cade Otton. The Niners have some athletes who can stick to your tight end, right? But man, they need playmakers in the worst way. And we were bound to see a game like this from Baker again, because the receiving room is so just decimated. Really impressive game again from Bucky Irving, by the way. He's just unreasonably good. 87 total yards, touchdown. He does 1 or 2 things each week that you're just not seeing from other players.
Yeah. Man, I hope Mike Evans can get back. I hope Tristan Wirfs' injury is not serious, because I really do like watching this offense, and also had a couple of Superflex teams that were really enjoying Baker Mayfield as a QB too, and I feel like that gravy train's about to run out. All right, let's move on to the final game that's in the we care about it section. Saints 20, Falcons 17. Saints get the classic Coach fired coach bump. The Rizzy, Coach Riz. Yeah, Coach Riz gets the Saints to a victory here. I don't really know what fantasy takeaways we're supposed to have about the New Orleans Saints. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, I saw you have a funny tweet about that, so I won't step on your toes there. But I mean, MVS, who knew that this was the guy that you needed here in Week 10? 109 catches on 109 catches, 109 yards on 3 targets with 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, this man has played with. He spent his whole career with Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen, and he just had the best MVS game that I can remember with Derek frickin' Carr. Did not see it coming. And he just showed up there too. So amazing. You can't do any, it's not actionable for fantasy, right? Am I going to tell people to go add MVS? Of course not. Of course you're not going to go out and add MVS. There's not a Rashid Shaheed role that he just slides into, and it's going to be, a 50-yard touchdown every week for the remainder of the season. But also, I don't know, this is a really nice moment for New Orleans, and I'm glad they got. It seemed like a raucous crowd. Coach Riz is a scene. He's a journey on the sideline, man. He either looked like the happiest sports dad you've ever seen on the sidelines, or a total crazed murderer. But he did not exactly hide his emotions at any given moment. So you got to like that guy. I don't know. It's fun to have coaches like that. So that was cool. Don't watch highlights of this one if you're an Alvin Kamara manager and you haven't seen it already, because he had just a wildly uncharacteristic brutal drop on a deep ball that would have been a walk-in touchdown, where there might have been one linebacker who was chasing him, but he had smoked everyone and was gonna jog into the end zone and dropped it.
Yeah, Alvin Kamara at least though did catch Fry for 50 on 6 targets, and he led the team in routes. So he will be the number one receiver on this team going forward. With Chris Olave, potentially out for the rest of the year. And yeah, MVS is the MVS leads the wide receivers with 18 routes. Taysom Hill is third on the team with 17 routes. This is what we're going to get from the Saints the rest of the way. I don't know if Coach Riz, the Riz God himself, is going to will them to more wins the rest of the way with this crew. But it will at least be interesting to watch to see if he can, I don't know. You're right. He's a compelling character, but I don't really know that we're going to get too many more games from the New Orleans Saints where this looks as good as it does.
No.
Mostly because let's talk about the team on the other side of this. Our colleague, Charles McDonald, who's a tortured Falcons fan, I think within like 5 minutes of kickoff, basically tweeted out, I've seen this loss, hundreds of times before. And I was like, damn, Charles, a long way to go in this game, but he was right. He was right. They lost this game. It's funny though, because unless you started Kirk Cousins in like a super flex league, or you started him because you're a tortured CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson drafter and like, oh, I've fallen into Kirk Cousins at this point. Unless you started Kirk, you're pretty much happy with anybody that comes out of this from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, Drake London 90 plus, Mooney 90 plus. Mooney continues to play really well. I guess if you played Tyler Algier, you're not totally happy because he got stonewalled a few times on the goal line. But Bijan Robinson continues to look like one of the best players in football. Right,
Yeah.
An incredible game, couple of touchdowns, very active as a receiver. He was great. I mean, they lose this thing because one of the best kickers in the game, Younghoe Koo, misses 3 field goals on a day that they lose by 3 points.
Yeah, not ideal. But again, I feel really good about where this offense is. I know that sounds stupid because they just lost a game to like the ghost of the New Orleans Saints at this point, with a guy with a head coach who's talking about clogging up the toilet in his post-game presser. If you didn't see that quote, definitely make sure to look it up. Because again, I'm not making that up. He did talk about that in his post-game presser. But anyways, yeah, I don't know how many more losses they're going to take like this. This is a tough loss for the Falcons to take, but unless the Bucs really get their stuff together, I think they're probably going to moonwalk to winning this division, and this will just be a speed bump in the road. Because otherwise, very impressed with this offense. Continue to love Drake London's usage. Continue to love Darnell Mooney's play, and I mean, you mentioned it, Bijan Robinson. Just, I don't know if he's going to win Offensive Player of the Year. But he certainly should get a couple of votes. He should at least get a couple of thoughts because that guy is unbelievably good. I can't get out of my head your line about him where you called him cartoonishly good a few weeks ago. And every time I've seen him just make unbelievable plays, that is exactly what I think.
Yeah, there's I don't know. I was going to say it's 2 or 3, but it's like 4 or 5, 6 touches a game where he's getting yards that are just simply not available to anybody other than maybe him, Saquon. I don't know. It's a short list of guys. Short list of guys. Like, he's doing things that don't seem like physics allows it, but yet he makes it happen. He's just a fantastically impressive player.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk through the games that we sort of care about right after this. All right, we're back. First game that we sort of care about is Chiefs 16, Broncos 14. Full disclosure, I know this game was super close. It literally came down to the final play where I don't know what divine being intervened with Will Lutz's kick. I don't know, I am merely a football analyst and podcast host. I am not here to speculate on whether it was the divine forces of good or evil or anything else. Any other force at play here. I am that is above my territory. However, I sure as hell thought that the Denver Broncos were about to drop the first loss on the Kansas City Chiefs of their season, obviously before it happened. So Chiefs 16, Broncos 14. The only reason I didn't have this in the first section, Andy, is because other than that spiel I just gave about the Chiefs and, the forces of good and evil, I'm not really sure what to say about on either side here.
Yeah, if Denver had won, and it seemed like they were obviously headed to victory, relatively chip-shotty field goal that ends up getting blocked, they would have earned it. There wasn't anything fluky about it. Like that's a really good defense that limited Kansas City to 16 points. It's just a pretty good team, and I gotta say, like this is the first time that Bo Nix has had a fantasy day without it involving like the ground game at all. He wasn't particularly involved on the ground. They contained him reasonably well. He still managed to throw for a couple of touchdowns, went over 200 yards, peppered his number one receiver the way we like to see. Right, Cortland Sutton was super involved, connected with 8 different receivers. So this was a pretty good game for Bo Nix. And the other thing on the Denver side that we need to take note of is that Audric Estime apparently took over the backfield. He outsnapped, outgained, outtouched everybody else. McLaughlin, Javonte Williams was just barely a rumor in this one. And, Estime is also, and I think people know this, especially if you've been tied to Javonte this year, hasn't been very efficient, and there have been almost no big plays. He's over 100 carries now, and only 8 of his runs have gone for 10 or more yards. Estime already has like 5 10-yard gains on less than 30 carries on the season, right? So like there's real juice there. He was a super fun college player who basically never missed last year. 18 touchdowns, 6.5 yards per carry at Notre Dame. So he's good. And he was the guy that they were rolling with. He's had a couple of fumbles this year, some ball security issues, but man, they were riding him on the final drive that should have set up the game-winning field goal. So he was on the field in the most important moments, and he was on the field throughout. So that's, at least on the Denver side, that's the biggest takeaway. And he didn't have like, I don't know, he didn't make a lot of fantasy noise or anything like that. So it's entirely possible that people aren't going to react to this the way they should. But that, it sure looks like he's now their featured back. Maybe I'm overreacting, and maybe it's just going to be some sort of hot hand situation moving forward. But man, he really dominated the workload there.
I mean, I don't know if you're overreacting here. 63.6% of the team rush attempts. Like you said, dramatic touch lead here. 14-3 for Javonte Williams, 2 for Jaleel McLaughlin. Javonte did play more on passing downs than Audric Estime, but who knows? I had somebody tweet me in the like, "Hey, how about Javonte Williams only having 1 touch in the first half?" I was like, "Well, they've been trying to bench him for probably about a year now. I guess they finally pulled it off. They finally were able to do it because, and it was hard to believe the Broncos when they kept saying every week we got to get Audric Estime more involved, because if you followed the Sean Payton Broncos over the last year, they've basically said every week that they want to get Marvin Mims more involved, and we got to find ways to get him on the field. And then he runs 6 routes or something in his rookie year. I think we're probably up to maybe he's averaging 12 routes per game or something like that. So congratulations. But it was a little hard to trust them with their rhetoric on young players, but they did it finally for Estime here. I don't know how much staying power this is. Like, would I be totally surprised if this flips back to Javonte Williams in future weeks? Just because of the way they've talked about it, I'd be a little bit shocked, but you can't be that stunned about it. So I'm with you. I think that Estime, because he didn't go off in fantasy, it might go under noticed on waiver wires, but maybe he is the top back on this team going forward.
Yeah. Again, like 14 carries, like the fantasy line just doesn't sound like much, right? 14 carries for 53 yards, but a lot of that, late game situation where they were just basically setting up a field goal. He's been really efficient on the season, and I think has looked really good.
Anything on the Chiefs here? I mean, DeAndre Hopkins, after a big game last week, I talked about this a little bit on FFL this morning, that pretty predictable big game for him against the zone heavy team against the Bucs last week. And they didn't do a ton as much this week to move him around. They mostly used him on the perimeter. Over 60% of his snaps were outside in this game. So he probably ran into Pat Surtain a bunch, but which is not too surprising. That was always probably going to happen. So Kareem Hunt, of course, and Travis Kelce are the most productive pass catchers in this one.
Yeah, Kareem Hunt really effective as a receiver in this one, not so effective on the ground. And I do continue to think that as soon as they get Isaiah Pacheco back, I don't know exactly when it happens, but it's coming because Andy Reid has kind of talked him up. They are missing Isaiah Pacheco, and I know that Kareem Hunt has been an absolute waiver wire hero, and everybody's gotten really attached to him. I think Isaiah Pacheco is a better runner and is gonna take a lot of these carries away. Maybe not all of them. Kareem Hunt again was super effective as a receiver in this one, but a lot of those carries need to go to Pacheco as soon as he returns. Kelsey 12 targets in this one and looked suspiciously like the sort of vintage Travis Kelsey that we all expect.
Yeah, every time I see Kareem Hunt have, I don't know, like anytime I'm looking over Kareem Hunt's box scores or people ask, how do you feel about Kareem Hunt in fantasy? I always want to say, I feel like Isaiah Pacheco should be having a monster 2024 season. That is how I feel about Kareem Hunt. Let's move on. Bills 30, Colts 20. Let's talk Bills here real quick, Andy. Not sure that we learned a ton from the Buffalo Bills. Of course, we know that Amari Cooper missed this game. Keon Coleman missed this game. Coleman might miss multiple weeks. Cooper sounds like he's a little bit closer to being back in the mix, which, of course, right when we kind of felt like, the Bills pass catching group is going to crystallize and it's going to be all, we're finally going to really have a great group here. We start getting injuries, but the Colts, yeah, they give this one to the Bills here with a few turnovers. We'll talk about them in a second, but did we really learn anything new about the Buffalo Bills in this one?
I don't know that we learned anything new. I mean, it's another game in which, Josh Allen just did not play well, and still had a decent fantasy day because he had the rushing touchdown, right? So like you survived it in fantasy, but a couple of interceptions in this one. I mean, I think missing the two guys who can consistently win outside is going to be a real problem for this team. So hopefully Cooper gets healthy and can return and be impactful. I mean, this is really difficult to go to a new team mid-season, even a great offensive environment like this, and then immediately have to deal with injury while you're getting acclimated to everything else in a new environment. So hopefully it gets better for Amari Cooper, because they're going to certainly once we get to December and January football, they're going to need everybody. Decent day for Khalil Shakir, but not particularly noisy. I did notice that he catches 6 balls on 9 targets. So that's 3 targets that he did not catch. That matches his season total. He came into this game having caught like 42 balls on 45 targets or something insane like that. So this is by his standards, terrible game.
Yeah. Hey, things happen. It's not even there's no drops credited to him as of this point either. So, things happen. But yeah, I mean, just atrocious Khalil Shakir game. Over 80% route participation for Matt Collins, Curtis Samuel, and Khalil Shakir. Nobody else runs more than 61% of the routes, which was Dawson Knox, because Dalton Kincaid picked up a little bit of an injury. So that is, again, something else we need to monitor from this one. Let's talk Colts here, man. I mean, geez, Shane Steichen said after the game, Joe Flacco is the starting quarterback until I say he's not. Joe Flacco had 3 turnovers in this game, also lost a fumble.
Yeah.
It was, and the Colts have made themselves an easy Twitter layup target. And I don't actually blame people for taking the layup at this point, because the only thing I will say about this, Andy, to kind of contribute to the Joe Flacco discourse, is that I think you could justify giving Anthony Richardson a beat. Hey, because we'll talk about Bryce Young a little bit later. Give it a second, head to the bench, stop playing for a little bit, and see if the game slows down. See if you can just kind of take some of that pressure off of you before things spiral and everybody is talking about you on First Take because you tapped out of the game and veteran offensive linemen are pissed about it. Let's just give it a beat. But what made no sense to me, and I said this at the time, was we're going to bench Anthony Richardson because Joe Flacco gives us a better chance to win. And that's not even about Joe Flacco, really. This team's just not that good. This team is, right. I don't know what delusion mirror they were looking into, but they're not a Joe Flacco away from being a playoff team, especially not when Joe Flacco is, he's Joe Flacco. Even did Jim Irsay only watch the highlight reel for Joe Flacco during his run with the Browns? Because this is kind of what he did. He gave a lot of plays in a very different offense, but he gave a lot of plays to Cleveland. He also gave a lot of plays to the defense. That's ultimately how they lost the game in the playoffs. They got obliterated by the Texans, was because he was a turnover fest in the first half. And again, he's a turnover fest in this game, and they do not have the defense. They don't really have the offensive personnel, especially with Michael Pittman out of this game because he just has been playing through injuries. And, they get some up and down play from the outside wide receivers, mostly up in this game. But, still it's Alec Pierce and a rookie Adonai Mitchell. They're just not built to have Joe Flacco take them the distance.
No, certainly not. And certainly with this defense, they cannot be giving the ball away 3 times. You know, like they don't have anything reliable on the other side of the ball. Flacco, like legit looked, you know, I don't want to call him like legit looked old.
100. He looked, he looked, you can say it. He looked like 100 years old at times during this, because he's 40 and quarterback years. That is 100.
Yeah. No, he looked crusty and like a beat slow in this one. And man, three picks. None of them, you know, none of them pretty. So the ugly situation there. And now they've kind of talked themselves into this situation where it's really weird if they go immediately back to Anthony Richardson. But we're coming up on a point where, you know, if you're not mathematically eliminated from the postseason, you're pretty close to. I mean, I know they're not there yet, but we could just be a couple weeks away from the postseason just being a near impossibility. And at that point, are we not going to play Anthony Richardson? Because that would be insane, right? Like if you're eliminated or on the brink of elimination and we're still rolling out Joe Flacco late in the season into December, that would just be crazy. I can't imagine that's going to happen.
Yeah, we're not quite at the point of the season where I'm, you know, looking up the playoff odds, you know, like I'm an addict or whatever, but we're getting pretty close, baby. And man, does that make me feel alive? But at this point, I would not be all that jazzed up about the damn Colts playoff chance because of what we're seeing right now. So yeah, I think at some point they go back to Anthony Richardson. It might even be, they might even do it this week, because it's not as if the schedule gets any lighter. That was another thing that was stupid about saying like, oh yeah, we're gonna play Joe Flacco the rest of the way. I'm like, yeah, how about we see what he looks like when he plays against the Vikings defense, the Bills defense. And I know the Jets are the Jets now at this point. We'll talk about them in a second, but that's the team they face in New York in week 11. So I mean, it's not as if it gets like suddenly easier. They get the Lions, the Patriots, and they go on bye in week 14. So we're definitely seeing Anthony Richardson again before the regular season ends.
Do we assume, are you assuming that Pittman's going to be out for a little while, right? Because while playing through that back injury, I mean, he just had a couple of 1-catch games and was like relatively ineffective. So perhaps not a surprise that he was rested in this one. I don't like, man, they should get him right.
Yeah.
I think.
I think he should. I think that he probably should never have played through that injury, because he wasn't an effective player, and you know I don't know that it made anybody better by him playing. So Adonai Mitchell did get a big bump. I'm glad you brought that up. Ran a route on 94.9% of the dropbacks, 6 targets. He caught all 6 of them for 71 yards. He's obviously been a big time separation player all year long, but has made a fair share of rookie mistakes. Like this is what I don't know. Again, we'll talk about the Panthers literally in the next game here, and it's very similar to me. And maybe we can just use this as a transition point, because I think that what the Colts should be doing right now is trying to get all these guys to grow up together. Like, let's try to get Adonai Mitchell some reps. Let's try to get Josh Downs and Anthony Richardson's chemistry on point. Like, let's get Richardson some more live reps, because they're not going anywhere this year. And hopefully that's what happens on the other side of, you know, Pittman being out. And then obviously whenever Richardson gets back in, because he's going to get back in at some point. Let's transition to the Panthers here. Panthers 20, Giants 17. You joked with me before FFL, Andy, when this game was on. Like, are you going to find a way to not have this game be in the third section? Or you said, you know, and I'll tell you what, buddy, I didn't want to put the Panthers and Giants Germany extravaganza in the games we sort of care about, but the late game slate did not stretch up with some bangers here. So honestly, there's some decent takeaways to come out of this one. But let's start on the Panthers side here. And a lot of what I just said with the damn Colts applies, I think, to the Panthers here. And look, I'm not going to go crazy because they barely beat Daniel Jones and the Giants. But you've been seeing, I think, all season that the Panthers have some dudes on offense that can play. Obviously, Chuba Hubbard, who was just obnoxiously good in this game. 28 carries. Miles Sanders picked up an ankle injury, but 28 carries. He was also an active participant in the passing game as well. He looked like he might have gotten banged up at one point, returned to the game. Jonathan Brooks is going to play after the bye week, so Chuba's probably not going to touch the ball this many times again, but he was awesome in this game. Jalen Coker, rookie receiver, can play. Xavier Legette, rookie receiver, can play. Jatavian Sanders caught a touchdown here. Yeah. I like what the Panthers have done here. We gave Bryce Young a beat. We got Deontay Johnson talked his way off this team, having fun, getting 2 targets a game with the Baltimore Ravens. Great decision by my guy Deontay there. And now I think Bryce is back, like growing up with some of these younger players. Yeah,
I thought especially at the start of the season there were throws where it looked like Bryce Young was just guessing and hoping, and we haven't seen that in these last couple games, which is a kind of progress, right? It's not you'd like him to be further along, but it's just a good game. It wasn't a noisy game in terms of statistically fantasy production, anything like that. It was pretty low yardage total, but I thought he had I thought he made some really nice decisions. Couple of decisions to run the ball went very well for him. Super effective game. They're also one of these teams now that they're left with this receiving core where everybody's on the same timeline, right? They're all first, second year players, and all had their moments. I was pretty impressed by Sanders today. Chuba Hubbard had 34 opportunities in that, 6 targets, 28 carries. I don't know what the split looks like with Brooks, and I guessed badly on what the split would look like for McCaffrey and the Niners. Chuba Hubbard deserves all the touches he can handle. So if they bring Brooks along slowly, that would be completely understandable because Hubbard is the best thing they have going on offense.
Yeah, this was a Dave Canales fever dream, too, where they throw the ball 25 times and the running backs account for 30 carries. So I do think in an ideal world that this can be maybe a 65 favor split, 65% in favor of Chuba Hubbard. But it's going to take Jonathan Brooks a minute to get rocked up here at this point. So I don't know. None of these players are fantasy starters in the passing game, but it's at least interesting. Even Bryce, he wasn't perfect in this game. He leaves some plays on the field. He missed some throws and stuff like that. But it's just at least nice to see some life in the damn Panthers passing game at this point. A rather lifeless passing game is the one that was on the other side of the field here in the New York Giants. I really don't know what else there is to say about the Giants, but it remains super frustrating to me, Andy Behrens, that there are talents and not perfect players. Malik Neighbors is not a perfect player. Tyron Tracy literally fumbled the game away for the team in overtime. But some dynamic players on this offense, and yet we've got Daniel Jones at quarterback and a head coach who I think, again, continues to wear the look on his face that he would rather be anywhere else but where he is.
It's shocking that they forced this game to overtime, if only because, Daniel Jones played the first half that he played was, that loses you your job under normal circumstances, especially if you have the history that Daniel Jones has. And I realize that there's nothing behind Daniel Jones that anybody's particularly interested in seeing. It's Drew Lock, right? Who cares? But man, at some point, you just, in terms of what you're communicating to the rest of the team, you can't let a guy play that poorly. People are going to see the flea flicker, and that was hilarious. They ran a flea flicker where everybody got open downfield, and you had your choice of receivers, and Wan'Dale Robinson is just like nobody else in the camera frame, and he doesn't pull the trigger. Takes a sack, which is just taking a sack off of flea flicker is just one of the saddest things in football. Through an interception where he just had to work the ball around Jadeveon Clowney and instead hit him in the face. It was just a terrible half of football. Kurt Warner late in the half put together a series of clips of Daniel Jones missing guys or just not throwing to open receivers, and I don't know. That's about as bad as it gets. So you face the Panthers, one of the most generous defenses in reality and in fantasy this year, and you're below 200 passing yards, 2 interceptions, no touchdowns, just another miserable Daniel Jones performance. And then they're going to reach the end of the season and not have injury protections on the contract and all that. At some point, you've got to pull the plug on Daniel Jones.
Yeah. I had a laugh at the fact that, like you mentioned, basically this half of football gets you benched usually. I think 31 other teams bench Daniel Jones, but in my entire Twitter timeline, and even reporters that have followed this team, that's probably the last snap that I think Dan Duggan from The Athletic, who does a great job, is this is probably the last snap that we see Daniel Jones play with the New York Giants after that Jadeveon Clowney interception. And I was like, are we crazy? We've seen this story 100 times before. No team is trying to will something to happen that is so obviously beyond. Whatever. I say beyond over about stuff. This is beyond over. Every other human being on planet Earth, I guess, except maybe the owner and GM know what the deal is here. And then, but sure enough, second half, Daniel Jones comes.
The head coach is over him. The head coach is fully over him. Yeah.
nobody's ever been more over something than Brian Daboll is over the fact that Daniel Jones is his quarterback. Every interview that they like, because they do these dumb coach interviews during the game where they say it's like a competition to which of the coaches can say less. And Brian Daboll, every single time they ask him, like, what's going on with the offense? You can tell what he wants to say, but he can't say it. So, at some point, I think if Drew Lock's little mini audition there against the Eagles a few weeks ago wasn't also some of the most atrocious football we've seen in the 2024 NFL season, he probably is already starting. But at some point, Drew Lock will start, and it will not make a damn bit of difference for Malik Neighbors or Tyron Tracy or, if the sickos that are starting Wan'Dale Robinson and stuff like that. Congratulations, Wan'Dale Robinson actually averages a real 10.2 yards per reception in this game. And he, dude, even me, the biggest Wan'Dale Robinson hater on earth, is like, that guy was somehow open downfield a couple of times in this game, and he never gets to go downfield. And Daniel, like, he was throwing a fit because Daniel Jones didn't see him. I'm like, I'd be pissed too, Wan'Dale. You ain't never get to go that far down the field, and the quarterback couldn't see you.
Yeah, he was the most open receiver on the flea flicker where Daniel Jones mysteriously just ate the sack. And started immediately hopping out of bounds and was clearly fuming.
Yeah, 56 catches. So we're, I don't know, we might be losing our pace to Wan'Dale Robinson catching 100 balls this season. We shall see. All right, let's move on to the final game that we sort of care about here. And this is a blowout. Cardinals 31, Jets 6. But if I had to pick one of the blowouts from the afternoon slate to discuss, I feel like this is one of the only ones with real deal actual takeaways here, because for the second week in a row, the Cardinals, I think, have an emphatic victory over a team that's, not the Panthers or something like that. I know the Bears are terrible and the Jets are terrible, but they're not like the cellar dwellers of the league. I think, or at least 4 weeks ago, I thought they weren't. And for the second week in a row, they have a dramatic victory over one of these teams. And I would argue that the coaching job is they completely outcoached yet another operation here in the New York Jets. So you got to give a lot of credit to the Cardinals, who mercifully, Marvin Harrison scores a touchdown. Kyler Murray scores 2 rushing touchdowns. So we don't have to talk about them in the damn panic meter, which is always a good week for me.
And Kyler Murray completed 22 of 24 pass attempts too, and had a crazy start. I don't know, did it end? 17, 18 consecutive completions. Just a filthy game by him, and they totally controlled it. And actually, like, probably the most encouraging thing if you're a Cardinals fan is that, again, not that New York is the most respectable offense, but they had settled into, like Aaron Rodgers has been rattling off like 200-yard, 2-touchdown games. That's not paying the fantasy bills necessarily, but they do put points on the board, but not against the Cardinals today. And the Cardinals hadn't been for the season a particularly effective defense. So that was really impressive. James Conner, great again. Trey Benson, a bunch of touches in this one. And some of that was the fact that the game became a laugher, I suppose, but still 12 touches, over 80 total yards. He looked good. Trey McBride always looks good. Harrison, a touchdown. Like, everybody that you wanted to make noise on the Cardinals side did. They did their part in an effort to push this game into like our lead block on the show, but the Jets just didn't do theirs.
Yeah, a couple of crazy stats about Kyler Murray from Next Gen Stats. He completed all 8 of his passes under pressure in this game, 8 for 8 for 87 yards. And the Cardinals gained 179 of their 266 total receiving yards after the catch. 40 plus yards after the catch over expectation for the Arizona Cardinals. So, and it felt like that. It felt like the Jets couldn't be bothered to tackle in this game. And honestly, it's felt like that for a minute. I gave Robert Saleh a lot of credit when he was the head coach of this team for keeping the defense as good and as engaged as he did, while the offense totally stunk up the joint throughout his tenure. And it is kind of interesting that Saleh's out of the building and now the Jets defense has become a huge problem. On those Jets and fantasy problems, basically any Jet you started in this game, you did have a little bit of a problem from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, I guess it was fine for Breece Hall on volume, but not for anybody else. What was the final target total for Devontae? It felt like 1 million, and 13. He didn't do anything.
6 for 13.
And he got led into a couple situations where I thought he really got rocked too. So not pretty. And then Aaron Rodgers couldn't even come through for us in like late game. This game definitely entered garbage time, and they still didn't make any noise.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Clayton Tune in this game. That's all you need to know. We saw a few other backup quarterbacks in this slate of games, which we will get to in our next section right after this break. All right, we're back. And we've made Andy wait long enough. We got to talk Patriots 19, Bears 13 in our games that could have been an email section. So I don't know, Andy, compose me the email on this particular contest.
Well, the subject line is probably fire Shane Waldron, right? Like I don't know. I don't like to talk about guys losing jobs, but man, this was really painful. And not at some point, I'm not even like, it's not really outcomes that are bothering me at this point. I want to see Caleb Williams have a little bit of success, and talk about somebody who's just being dealt a difficult hand. I joked about it on Twitter during the game. Like there were so many sideline shots in this game of Waldron and Williams sitting next to each other on the bench. And in not a one of them is Waldron actually speaking to him. He's just like head down in the tablet. And Caleb has the most like dead-eyed expression on his face, and nothing went well. It felt like the Bears were in 3rd and long all day, and they have no answers in 3rd and long because Caleb doesn't have much longer than like 2.5, 2 seconds to. I mean, there's no time for anything to develop downfield for this team. So if they're going to live in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, like they just don't have answers, and they can't sustain drives that way. Anytime they did get it into 3rd and manageable, it was a guaranteed pre-snap penalty. So they're just like, some of it's injury, some of it is just dreadful offensive line play. It's a lot of it though is that like we're not scheming anybody open, and it's notable when they run a play where somebody actually does come open, and it's not like just through their own hard effort. It only happens like maybe once a half. And then you look at the Patriots side of this game, and they had open receivers all the time. They had receivers who are not at the level of DJ Moore and Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. They got lesser receivers who are getting wide ass open, and it's a little frustrating. And like Drake May didn't even play that well. He threw a terrible interception. He threw at least 2 other balls that should have been picked. So this is as bad a Drake May game as we've seen, and the Bears didn't even come close to challenging that team.
Yeah, I said on the Fantasy Film Room last week with Nate Tice, my kind of midseason trend is that I don't care about your receiver talent if you can't block it up, and you can't run you don't have real route concepts, and that is just the Chicago Bears offense at this point. I'm like you. I don't know if. Here's the deal. I don't know if firing Shane Waldron is the answer. And Matt Eberflus said after the game, we're looking at everything. I mean, Matt Eberflus, we're looking at you too, buddy boy. I don't know what to tell you about that, but we're also looking at you, pal. And I think we probably should have looked at you a little bit more before the season. I don't know if firing anybody is the answer. I don't know if firing Shane Waldron is going to make the difference here, but I do know that the Bears are in the definition of insanity territory, trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Like they just got to do something else different because you mentioned what do they do when they get to 3rd down? They don't have any answers. Defenses have answers for them. The Patriots in this game, they blitzed on 48.8% of the dropbacks according to Next Gen Stats, setting season highs in pressures and sacks against the Bears on Sunday afternoon. That was what the Cardinals basically did last week. They also set season highs in like all of their pressure stats, and 16 players got a pressure or whatever. And the Patriots played a bunch of man coverage and sent blitzes, and there's no the Waldron offense has no answers for man coverage, and they have no answers for pressure. So I don't really think anything is changing in Chicago unless we see a variable change. And maybe that happens this week. Next game up, Vikings 12, Jaguars 7. I'll be honest, Andy, this is probably the game in the early window that I saw the least of, and looks like I didn't miss too much.
I'm embarrassed that I even highlighted this game on the midweek podcast when we were looking ahead to the slate. I mean, this was a Sam Darnold doesn't show up sort of game. 5 interceptions, 5 interceptions in this one, right? Mac Jones gave you the game that you probably should have expected from Mac Jones, but Sam Darnold throwing 0 touchdown passes and 3 picks. One of which may not have actually been caught, but whatever, it was still a bad ball. Just a really ugly game all around. Like, credit to the Vikings for winning it. We had a little bit of an injury scare with Aaron Jones, but it seems like he's fine. He re-entered the game, so that's good. Good, like, I don't know, not a lot of good stat lines in this one anywhere. Pretty good stat line for TJ Hawkinson, who goes over 70 yards, catches 8 passes in this one. That's really good to see.
What's your worry level about Sam Darnold, QB1, Minnesota Vikings?
Yeah, this is one of those performances where if it hadn't happened already, we would have been talking about, oh man, is it JJ time if JJ was healthy? I don't know, the fan base had to be thinking maybe it's Nick Mullins time. This was, and he hasn't. It's not like he's had a bunch of bad games this year. He's had a couple of clunkers, but this was definitely one of them. And the troubling thing is, I mean, this is about as friendly as a matchup gets. I mean, Everybody has picked apart the Jaguars. Caleb picked apart the Jaguars. Absolutely everyone has. It is not difficult to find answers against this team, and it felt like Minnesota was moving the ball, and then it would just get given away.
Whew, Nick Mullins. I did say early on in the year on Football 301 that I feel like at some point we're going to arrive at we're just like starting Sam Darnold the entire season. I kind of think we're getting close to that moment, which, long term for the Vikings team, whatever, like they have a rookie quarterback coming up. But I mean, there's definitely going to be some moments where, Justin Jefferson's going to let you down. And like these guys are not going to produce from a fantasy perspective because Sam Darnold he's Sam Darnold.
Yeah, it kind of justifies like the weird rumors that were out there about are the Vikings going to be in on Matthew Stafford at the trade deadline, right? Like now that really falls into place, and you're like, oh yeah, they probably should have been in on Matt Stafford at the trade deadline or some other quarterback answer, because you can't have this game again. You're certainly not beating a good team with this effort. Just an absolutely brutal watch every time I peeked in on this one.
Next game up, Chargers 27, Titans 17. Will Levis returns for the Tennessee Titans. Actually had a pretty decent Will Levis game outside of a couple moments, but I mean, listen, it's Will Levis. There's going to be a couple moments, but on the other side of it, I mean, Justin Herbert, rushing threat in this one. Literally every time I looked up at this game, Justin Herbert is making a play in the open field with his legs.
I mean, he can run a little bit. I thought that was really good to see. I thought that was really fun. And it was the touchdown run was great. This was somehow Quentin Johnston, by the way, like another busted coverage touchdown, like every week. How can no Bears receiver has a single, wide open moment like this, and it's happening for Quentin Johnston every week. I don't know how to explain it. But he got another opportunity here. Sure. But Herbert's been great. I mean, this was not a particularly competitive game. Good to see Calvin Ridley actually make a little bit of noise in this one with Will Levis. He's, every week it's pretty stiff headwinds for Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, we're probably gonna have to take Calvin Ridley out of the Coping Corner tomorrow on the Panic Meter podcast. Oh. Yeah, I think it's time. Now that we got a good game with Will Levis, we'll discuss it with Dalton, but he's probably gonna he's been pushing me for a minute to take Calvin Ridley out of the Coping Corner, and I've stubbornly kind of kept him in there. So let's talk about the last game here. We finally arrived. Eagles 34, Cowboys 6. I guess because producer Colin hates himself, he normally doesn't put notes into the outline for me to read.
There are a lot of notes in the document here. And you know what? Goodness.
Colin sent an email to himself. I'm going to just go ahead and read them here. This one from the 33rd team. There have been, God, this is going to be rough. So buckle in, everybody.
Yeah.
There have been 12,650 regular season games since 2000. The Cowboys' 49 passing yards versus the Eagles ranks 12,561st. This next one from Todd Archer. The Cowboys have been outscored by 94 points at home this season, which is the 6th worst mark by any team through 4 games in the Super Bowl era. since 1990 or since 1966. Believe, Andy, how old were you in 1996? We'll follow up on that in a moment.
I mean, I was driving.
Yeah, obviously. And 20 points worse than any team during that stretch. When asked after the game if CeeDee Lamb didn't catch that touchdown because of the sun in his face, if you have CeeDee Lamb on your fantasy team, do not Google CeeDee Lamb's son. Do not go on Twitter and check it out because it was brutal. CeeDee Lamb said, yes, 1,000%. When asked a follow-up question, are you in favor of curtains in Jerry Jones's, and I'm editorializing now, in Jerry Jones' stupid stadium where the offensive players consistently have sun in their face, CeeDee Lamb said 1,000%. By the way, they have, again, this is from Colin, who, again, I just literally hates himself, I guess. They've put up curtains for events before. WrestleMania had them when the stadium hosted it, but we can't put it up for the team's home games. And final note from Colin, when asked about his thoughts pre-pod, he said he's counting down the days of spring training and the MLB season. Yeah, if you're a Cowboys fan, I had a couple of my buddies that are Cowboys fans in group text, like tweeting about, or I mean, texting about this game. I'm like, guys, just don't engage with this. Like, this is, the Cowboys are in the coping corner for a reason. I mean, Trey Lance, I don't know what was more outrageous, the fact that Trey Lance played a bunch of snaps in this game, or Kenny Pickett played a bunch of snaps in this game.
I will say this doesn't mean a lot to you, not being much of a baseball fan or aficionado, but when Colin says that he's looking forward to spring training and the MLB season, he's talking about Nationals baseball. That's his team. This isn't like, oh, he's looking forward to yet another, Yankees or Dodgers season. No, he's talking about the Washington freaking Nationals. That's what Colin is looking forward to. That's what the Cowboys have done to him. I tweeted about this, and it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of not. I don't know that Brandon Aubrey is the best kicker in the game, but I don't know that we can keep Brandon Aubrey on fantasy rosters if this is what the Cowboys offense is going to look like over the balance of the season.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the Cowboys are in the coping corner for a reason, and I think Brandon Aubrey is not immune from that. I think Brandon Aubrey might be in the coping corner too.
I thought they might say, let's have some fun with this and let's give Brandon Aubrey a 70-yard attempt every game. But no, they need to get in position to give him a 70-yard attempt.
When can they get there? I mean, even when they got there, they gave a token carry to Zeke Elliott because they're not a serious operation, and he fumbled it at the goal line. So even people that had to hate start Rico Dowdle in this one didn't get anything out of it. So Dallas Cowboys, next opponent, Houston Texans, Commanders, Giants, and then the Bengals. I mean, it's going to, I think I've been saying it for a while. I think it can get worse before it gets better. You might as well just throw Trey Lance out there and just be weird the rest of the season and see what you got. Like, otherwise, I don't really know what you're doing here. With that, Andy Behrens, any awards you want to give out here in Week 10 before we get out of here?
The WTF of the week for me was I didn't even know this was coming, but Josh Allen is now in second place. He's tied for second place in Bills history in rushing touchdowns, and he tied he's behind Thurman Thomas. But he tied O.J. Simpson, who people know O.J. Simpson. The kids out there know O.J. Simpson for a variety of reasons.
Familiar with his work, yes.
Yes. He was also the most dominant player in the NFL for like a 5 or 6 year run and won rushing titles every year. And it's crazy to me that Josh Allen now has as many rushing touchdowns as O.J. Simpson, who was a Bill for a decade and rushed for over 10,000 yards in that uniform. Like, that's crazy. Just a very, in an otherwise unimpressive day by Josh Allen, that is like shockingly great company to put yourself in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, no question about it. That is pretty impressive. I think we got to give a vulture of the week out this week. We haven't done this award maybe ever, but this has to go. And I don't know if just because this affected me personally that I've noticed this, because there is actually 2 dynasty teams where I have Gus Edwards, and both of those 2 teams are in such bad shape at the running back position that I'm like, oh my God, thank God Gus Edwards is off IR. I got to throw him out there maybe on the chance that they blow out the Tennessee Titans and he falls into my least favorite phrase, he falls into the end zone at least once. Well, guess what? They did kind of work over the Tennessee Titans. And of course, obviously Gus Edwards was out-touched. 18 touches for J.K. Dobbins to 10 for Gus Edwards. Of course, J.K. Dobbins outworked him. Of course, obviously, J.K. Dobbins also had 2 carries on the goal line. J.K. Dobbins, he did not score a rushing touchdown because a young man by the name of Hassan Haskins, who actually played for the Tennessee Titans. So you know what? Actually, this is I should have seen this coming. I should have. How honestly,
the Haskins revenge game.
Yes,
sure. Yeah.
Yes, especially because Hassan Haskins was an All-American at Michigan under Jim Harbaugh. So you know what?
Yeah,
I take it back. I was about to come in here and say Hassan Haskins, Vulture of the Week, because he touched the ball twice, one of which was a goal line plunge for a touchdown against the Tennessee Titans when many people needed J.K. Dobbins for their fantasy team, and one idiot on planet Earth needed Gus Edwards for his 2 despicable dynasty teams that have Gus Edwards on them. And instead it was Hassan Haskins, who absolutely, I guess, just was able to get revenge on the team that drafted him in the 4th round by his head coach, who coaches the Los Angeles Chargers when he was an All-American at Michigan. So you know what? I actually, instead of complaining about this, I apologize to the listeners for not being on the Hassan Haskins anytime touchdown to literally win us all enough money to retire.
I'll give you an honorable mention, Vulture of the Week, that I had forgotten about while I was, I think I started Tank Bigsby in maybe 2 leagues, and it was clear that Jacksonville was leaning on Travis Etienne again. And I was just like, please, we're at the goal line. Let's at least allow Tank Bigsby this. Give him this honor. Let him find the end zone. But no, we got a Mac Jones rushing touchdown. We got a 1-yard Mac Jones rushing touchdown. I
guess while we're giving it out too, we might as well got to talk about Jeremy McNichols, your boy, Jeremy McNichols, who also had 4 carries for 7 yards and 1 touchdown.
He was my guy last week, not helping me this week.
No, he is not. Because that is fantasy football, right? It's like, oh, well, can't play McNichols. He's the RB3. Chris Rodriguez is the RB2 with Brian Robinson out. And, of course, McNichols saunters into the end zone, for one of the touchdowns. And he couldn't even shoot. Couldn't even go to Austin Eckler. So we're talking about McNichols and Haskins. I think that's about the time we gotta end the podcast here. So
that's fair.
Andy,
it's a good rule.
Appreciate the hell out of you, buddy. I'm actually really torn up about this Hassan Haskins situation. So I'm gonna get back in the lab and I'm gonna get better from this. I'm gonna work. I'll work harder for next week to find the random revenge game head coach narrative that wins us all trillions of dollars on the betting market.
Just bad process by you. Yeah.
I mean, atrocious. Honestly, I expect, I'm surprised it hasn't hit the email already. I expect like a full meeting with my boss, his boss, way up the chain, to talk about my performance review after this Hassan Haskins.
We got to talk about the Haskins fiasco.
Oh yeah. Hey, well, that's going to do it for today's show. I hope to be back on Tuesday to host the podcast if I haven't been forced to resign in disgrace over the Haskins fiasco. I will be back on Tuesday, and of course Dalton Del Don will join me for the post week 10 panic meter. Please send in your panic fantasy mailbag. That is fantasy mailbag at yahoosports.com. Maybe I'm panicking about being out of a job because of the Haskins fiasco. Who knows? Until then, we are out.